So, today we mark not only harvest, but the end of the season of creation, the early days of Black History Month, and the 17th Sunday after Trinity. And this week we also had National Poetry Day, so let's see what we can do. So these seasonal markers sharpen our focus and especially our awarenesses of injustice. We can helpfully package and line up our thinking and praying like soldiers in manageable chunks. On the other hand, this is not how the world presents itself to us, especially for we creatures of religion who also lead our lives carried along by the river of eternity. Life is intersectional. Creation is not a noun, especially not a finished or hierarchical one. Creation is continual, ebullient, coming to be, signalled by a veritable cacophony of voices. As Louis MacNeice has it, world is incorrigibly plural. We've been listening to some of the voices of this coming to be over the past month, including those of beavers, frogs, black holes, cyclones, wild horses, bee-eaters, rivers, icebergs, moths, rhinoceros, and on it goes. You can hear some of these many voices by scanning the QR codes on the posters in the courtyard. We've also been listening quietly in our Praying with Creation series on Thursday evenings during this season. And you can hear many more voices of creation from across the 4.6 billion year history of planet Earth by joining our walk through deep time this afternoon. There's more information about this on the back of your service sheet, and just to note, you don't need a smartphone or an app. Many of these voices will not be heard in the future. We're well into our planet's 6th mass extinction event. The rate of loss of species is up to 10,000 times greater than it was before a small subset of we humans started on the path of dominating other species, as well as the global majority of other humans. Against this backdrop, every voice of connection and thoughtfulness and justice matters. The Lost Words blessing song we heard just now invites us to walk through the world with care, to sing the things we see, to let new names with new voices take and root and thrive and grow. Today we're privileged to hear from 3 more of these voices of creation from our own congregation, who will share something of their own connectedness and action in the world. First we have Sylvia Ayo, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but she's a long-term member of our international group and is originally from Uganda. She's currently training for work as an engineer in the transport sector. Sylvia is mother to Danny, who just started school in September, and as they can't be here, they spoke to me earlier in the week.
So, Sylvia, fantastic to be talking to you here in lovely Valentine's Park in East London. Can you tell us a bit about a time in your life that you really, really enjoyed being outside?
I mean, having lived all my life in Uganda, in the city, I did get the opportunity to work in the park, in Queen Elizabeth National Park, and honestly, that was the best time of my life. I always wish I could go back, but, well, that is definitely not possible. But it was just an amazing time, just being one with nature, you know, the quietness where no cars, no TV, because there was no signal, no phones. I mean, that was like the beginning of mobile phones, but this place is so out. At the time, there was no signal. So if you actually needed to make a phone call, you had to go off the peninsula. So that was 2-3 hours away just to make a call. So, I mean, there's so many things we always took for granted, but I do really appreciate that time in Queen Elizabeth National Park. I mean, all you ever had was animals, birds, and even sometimes nothing. Just, realizing that, wow, it's just me, no other life around you, just you. So that was pretty amazing.
And tell us a bit about the kind of work you were doing there.
I went there to work as a park warden, and this was mainly to do with protecting the animals and the environment, and also creating awareness with the local people to kind of build a core living together, but reminding them that these animals came before them. They were always there. We just came in. So they always have a right of way. And also to help people realize that these animals are bringing in so much to the community. They bring in tourists. These tourists pay. Hence, from these funds, the National Wildlife Authority has managed to bring the locals schools, clean water, roadways to avoid the collision with the animals, and sometimes like with the elephants, because elephants, they've created, well, not created, there is a journey at a certain time of year that they make. This path is the same, regardless of whether you build a wall, whatever you do, they will break it down. Because this has been, it's generations and generations of them crossing through here. So it was trying to get the locals to just realize that there are some things that are unchangeable.
And were you successful?
Well, for the elephants, we were successful because the amount of destruction they would cause, you had to move, because they would basically destroy everything in their ways. Because what was happening is the local farmers were planting their crops along these routes. So it was now just trying to get everybody to relocate away from these routes that especially the elephants do take. Because an elephant is a big animal. How are you, a farmer, going to fight that?
So thank you to Sylvia for reminding us that there still are remote places, but it's still possible for humans to belong. One thing she didn't say for the tape is how committed she is to Danny having an outdoor life, and the pair of them spend a lot of time in East London parks. So next we have our very own Ordinand, David Wang. David is on placement with us for 2 years. He's studying at St Augustine's College, and he is developing godly play for us. And in another life he's an architect, which I didn't know until very recently. So welcome to David. You're going to use this and I'm going to use this. Yeah.
Hello.
So, David, question for you. Tell us about an experience or a memory of the natural world that has stayed with you and what you learned from it.
I grew up in going to church at Chinese church in London. It was a really tight-knit and loving community. But there, the doctrine that humankind was made in God's image was somehow interpreted to denigrate the rest of creation. The live animals that I encountered were generally regarded as pests, to be killed, and plants were strictly indoor and merely for decoration. I don't know how that attitude in me began to change, but it happened in a big way. I gave in to 2 guinea pigs for my youngest son. Never before had I gone to so much trouble for furry friends to cuddle, care for, and value as fellow creatures. And guinea pigs are not smart. In a way, they are like mini sheep, always getting into trouble in the garden and very vulnerable to predators like foxes. I now think when Jesus implies we are like sheep, it was not a compliment. I've since felt the sorrow of seeing a beautiful woodpecker fly into our window, fall to the deck, and take its last few breaths, while I could only stroke its head. My son and I made a little cardboard coffin for it and gave it a proper burial with prayers. You can laugh, but it felt right to do that.
Thank you. So we talked about your interest in ways to face reality, which I thought was interesting. Can you say a little bit about that in relation to the climate and ecological crisis?
Yes. What has recently got me excited is Bishop Lucer of Willesden, when he talked about donut-shaped church, inspired by donut-shaped economics, a concept developed by economist Kate Raworth to challenge the axiom, growth, growth, growth. Repeated last week by our Prime Minister to mitigate criticism of her economic policies. Raworth challenges this by recognising our planet as an ecosystem. In her thinking, each economy should strive and grow to provide a social foundation for its people. Clean water, food, health, education, political voice, etc., etc. When an economy falls short in these essentials, she pictures it as falling into the hole in the middle of a donut. But there is also an outer edge to a ring donut, which is our ecological ceiling. Economies, especially wealthy ones, do overshoot this ceiling through pollution, ozone depletion, biodiversity loss, and a dozen other areas. In this case, further growth isn't justified, so it should no longer be the case that GDP or GDP per capita is the way to go to measure progress. At last, when I came across this, I thought, an economic argument that isn't just bigger is better. Equality and fair distribution is also part of this. So perhaps share, share, share might be a better slogan. You can go and look into this, but I also want to say, I think the other equally big reality we have to look at is within ourselves. Over the last 50 years or so, ever so gradually, our society has been building up faith in consumerism. We have noticed the creep, I'm sure. It used to be about the quality of the food. Now it's about the packaging. So much so, consumerism seems to have become an immovable megalith, certainly in this country, perhaps the world over. I think consumerism religiously forms habits and desires in us that we are not even aware of. Dangerous habits that ramp up our privilege and end up ravaging the whole world. Sally Weintraub has called our state our state of exceptionalism. Psychological strategies to take away the discomfort of not being more caring. The question for me is, what does loving God and creation in all this look like? What Christian resources do we have to crack consumerism is a big question for me.
And the biggest question, I think, is how is all of this going to impact on your future life as a priest?
Well, I think that whatever we are doing, the environmental crisis is the elephant in the room. I think here, and becoming a priest, when we have Eucharist, because of the simplicity of the elements, bread and wine, I'm always reminded that Christ has blessed matter, all the created universe. So economics, psychology, and anything that happens in embodied persons, feelings, thoughts, everything, all manner of things can be redeemed as a grace. I want that real presence for myself in my devotion, and as a priest to make it available to as many people as possible. I think, unlike consumerism, it can lead me away from satisfying my own ego.
Thank you so much, David. That's really great. And finally, Alice. So, Alice has been a part of SJP for about 4 years. In fact, she turned up in 2018, right when we were celebrating our Gold Award Harvest Festival. So the sights were set quite high, really, weren't they? So Alice has studied theology at Oxford, and subsequently, interestingly, said to me she felt she had to shelve quite a lot of her stirring environmental and feminist theology that she'd been studying, as it didn't feel particularly welcome in some of the spaces she was in. But she's made up for that since by writing some really incredible stuff for us, particularly for our Camino companions last year. In recent years, Alice has been a primary school teacher in Wembley and in charge of the school farm. And she's currently studying for an MSc in Outdoor Environmental and Sustainability Education at Edinburgh, so welcome to the Deep South. Tell us about an early connection or memory of the natural world, Alice.
So the one that I thought of was, we grew up on Brixton Hill, and I was thinking about, I used to collect woodlice quite obsessively. I'd go around the garden finding all the woodlice that I could, and the other thing was making snails race across the patio.
Okay. No feelings of oneness in the forest then?
Oh, quite a lot of wonder involved.
Thank you. So how do you see the relevance of climate change to faith? How can they relate to each other?
So I think there are three things that I wanted to mention here. One was, firstly, that it's a matter of justice. So those who contribute least to fossil fuel emissions are already being killed and displaced through extreme weather and crop failure, while those who contribute most are being affected the least. And the effects of climate change are being felt along the lines of race, gender and economic status. Jesus calls us to take the side of people who are being most marginalised, even when that means going against the will of those who have power and wealth. The second point that I had was that we're called to love our neighbour. That's the most fundamental point. And that neighbour might just be people who live at the other side of the world, who are losing their homes and their crops to heat waves and flooding, like those living in Pakistan. That neighbour also might be a turtle dove, or a Sumatran tiger, or a European eel, or any of the other animals that are soon to become extinct unless things change significantly. And my third point was something a bit like what David said. Christianity has been called the religion of the body par excellence. So in the Eucharist, we'll hear, "This is my body." We believe in resurrection of the body. We are the body of Christ. Lucy has talked about Jesus as God's body language. So bodies are important to God because we are body. Bonhoeffer said, "Humans don't have bodies and souls, we are body and soul." We are Adam, from the Hebrew Adamah, meaning ground or earth. And in Jesus we see the Word made flesh. Flesh is the word for what we're all made of: humans, animals and plants. So in flesh, that is, in body, we find God. And so in God, bodies are made sacred, including the body of the earth, and bodies of water, and the bodies of insects and fish, and including all human bodies without exception.
And from that faith and strong theological underpinnings, you've become an activist. Can you tell us a bit about that, and what motivates you and how you do that?
Yes, so I've spent this week supporting Just Stop Oil and Christian Climate Action, and finding myself doing a lot of sitting in silence with Quakers in various parts of the City of London, to really plead with the government to put a halt to the over 100 new fossil fuel projects that have just been licensed, despite the advice of the UN that there should be no new fossil fuel investment. So I feel terrified that this might not be noticed, and that maybe the government doesn't care, despite the fact that it's actually doubtful that humanity will survive to see this century through if no significant changes take place. You would think they would want to be on the safe side in this. A few years ago, I attended my first environmental protests, and right in the middle of the protest, there was a group of Christians who were locked onto a giant pink table in the middle of a busy junction, including quite a few clergy. It was actually one of the first times that I didn't feel embarrassed to be identified as a Christian in a secular context. The people who were there understood that for those clergy, what they were doing was an expression of their faith. And it was the first time that I saw people who weren't religious in any way realise that Christianity might be relevant and might have something to say to our society that might need to be heard. So the Bible, as I read it, is full of people who don't comply with the state. So think of Jonah telling a king that he needed to repent or they would be destroyed. Think of Daniel and his companions. Think of Moses' mother and the midwives who refused to kill the Hebrew baby boys. Think of Moses himself leading people out of slavery. Think of Esther and Mordecai. Think of Paul and Stephen. Think of so many members of the early church. And most obviously, Jesus, who consistently stood up for the marginalized and stood against those with power, even to the point of death. So it really is quite unbelievable to me that Christianity has become synonymous with well-behaved and obedient to the state when we have all those powers of disruption and resistance in our sacred text.
Any last words on that preparation, that emotional and psychological preparation about not being so well behaved?
So I've definitely had to come to terms with the ways that I define myself as good, and good generally means not getting told off, which is actually more difficult than I expected to let go of. It's also shown me a really different side of our society. So what happens when a person is not willing or not able to fit into our existing legal structures, and how punishment is handed out so subjectively, with so many presuppositions and prejudice about who deserves it and how great that punishment should be. So we all know that due to ongoing institutional racism in the police and in the courts, it is more risky for people who are black and for those on a visa to engage in that kind of activism. So I think I do have a responsibility to do whatever I feel I personally am able to do, and then to push that limit just a little bit sometimes. And at the same time, I'm 33, and I'm quite aware that not everyone gets to live this long. That life is finite, and I am so lucky to be alive. So taking part in activism helps me to make sure that I'm not falling into denial about the situation, and I'm also not falling into despair on the other side. So it is a responsibility, yes, but also looking after the earth is first of all a joy and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you to David. Thank you to Sylvia in the ether. So, all our voices matter. So you'll notice that you've got a piece of paper in front of you, and you're invited to share your own thought or prayer or testimony. And when you come up for communion in a bit, could you please put them in the baskets, and we'll make sure that those are kept and prayed. So we heard an incredible manifesto for harvest in the reading from Deuteronomy, I'd like to just end with one from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is distilled from eons of Indigenous American wisdom, the way she has put this. She's a scientist, a botanist, and a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. She says, "The honourable harvest, a practice both ancient and urgent, applies to every exchange between people and the earth. Its protocol is not written down, but if it were, it would look something like this. Ask permission of the ones whose lives you seek. Abide by the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Harvest in a way that minimises harm. Take only what you need and leave some for others. Use everything that you take. Take only that which is given to you. Share it as the earth has shared with you. Be grateful. Reciprocate the gift. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever." Amen.